The first sound was silence. Not the kind that came from absence, but the kind that came from intention. No alarms, no assistants tapping at the door, no back-to-back interviews. Just the soft hush of morning air pressing against the window pane. In the filtered light of Los Angeles waking up beyond the glass, Keanu Reeves lay still beneath the cotton sheets. Eyes open, heart slow. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he had slept until his body said enough. The calendar had whispered its quiet reminder today was his birthday, but he had long since made his decision. No parties. No phone calls. No dinners. No team surprises. No carefully curated guest list. He wanted none of it. He had told Maya, his assistant, gently but firmly. "No plans," he said. "Not this year." She'd hesitated. Not even a quiet one. "People will wonder." But he had smiled faintly and shook his head. Let them. Truth was, he didn't want to be celebrated. It's not because he was bitter or grieving, because he was tired. Saul tired. Drained in a way he couldn't explain even to himself. Months of public obligations had chipped away at him. Red carpets, press junkets, charity galas, photo ops, sound bites, perfectly tailored suits, and perfectly timed smiles. He wasn't unhappy. He was just quiet inside. And the noise of the world had grown too loud, so he rose slowly. Padding across the hardwood floor barefoot, the echo of his steps the only sound in the house. He moved like someone rediscovering space to breathe, to think, to simply be. In the kitchen, he brewed his own coffee, grinding the beans by hand, savoring the rhythm. The smell filled the room like an old memory, rich, bitter, grounding. He settled by the window, cradling the mug, eyes scanning the stillness outside. Birds hopped along the garden fence. Squirrel darted up a tree. The sky held the pale blue of a day not yet burdened by heat. On the side table rested a worn book of poetry, a gift from a friend long ago. He opened it, running his fingers across the faded underlines. The words were simple, aching, human. Lines about resilience, about solitude, about the beauty that only grows in quiet soil. He read for a long time. At one point, he closed the book and leaned back, eyes drifting shut, memories surfacing, uninvited birthdays. From long ago when he was just a boy in Toronto, chasing balloons across a yard, laughter in the air, his mother's smile soft and full of light. A cake that tilted slightly to the side, candles flickering, voices singing off-key, joy real and messy and full of warmth. He missed that. Not the celebration, but the realness of it. What he had now was admiration, applause, respect, but the intimacy of being known, really known, felt like something that had slowly slipped through his fingers over the years. Outside, the wind stirred. The leaves. A single petal fell from the vine, drifting gently to the patio. He took another sip of coffee. The warmth was steady, but it didn't fill the hollow that had quietly opened in his chest. It's not sadness exactly. Not loneliness, an ache, one he couldn't quite name. He thought this day would bring peace, and maybe it still would. But beneath the calm, something else stirred, something unfinished, something waiting, and in the distance, unnoticed for now, the clouds began to gather. The rain came without warning. One moment the sky was merely gray, draped in quiet indecision. The next, it broke open an unceremonious downpour that turned the garden into a shimmering blur. Thick rivulets raced down the windows, soft thunder rumbled low across the hills, and the sound of the world was swallowed by water. Keanu Reeves stood barefoot at the edge of the living room, staring out into the storm. He hadn't moved in some time. The poetry book lay closed beside his now cold coffee. He wasn't reading anymore, wasn't even thinking, really. He was listening to the quiet hum behind the rain. Something just out of place at first. He dismissed it. The sound was faint, irregular. The wind could play tricks like that, and Los Angeles had its own way of groaning when the weather shifted. But the sound came again, clearer, higher, a voice, or more precisely, a cry. He moved toward the front of the house. No urgency in his steps, just a growing awareness. Like gravity pulling him forward, the cry came again, sharp, muffled, unmistakably human. He flicked on the porch light. Rain cut through the yellow glow in diagonal lines. Everything outside looked wet, shifting. Strange then, he saw it. A small figure, hunched, motionless, pressed tightly against the front gate, as though it trying to disappear into the cold metal. So its breath caught a child. He moved quickly now, slipping on a jacket and grabbing an umbrella from the stand. He opened the door. The wind hit immediately, tugging at his sleeves and scattering leaves across the porch. The rain soaked him within seconds, but he barely noticed. His eyes stayed locked on the gate. As he approached, the child didn't react. No movement, no sound. Just a trembling shape wrapped in soaked fabric, knees pulled to chest, head bowed. Low, Keanu slowed his steps as he neared. "Hey," he said, his voice low and steady, careful not to startle. "Are you okay?" The child lifted his head. A boy? Maybe 8, maybe 9. His dark hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his lashes. His lips trembled. Eyes too wide for someone so small. It looked like he'd been out there for hours. "You're Keanu Reeves," the boy said quietly, through chattering teeth. Keanu blinked. The name sounded strange coming from someone so vulnerable. "Yeah," he replied gently. "What's your name?" A pause. "Diego." Keanu crouched beside him, sheltering them both under the umbrella. "What?" Yet, he didn't ask why the boy was there. The moment called for something simpler. "Let's get you inside, Diego. We'll get you warm and dry. Then we can talk, okay?" The boy hesitated. Fear still lingered in his eyes, but exhaustion was stronger. He nodded. They walked back slowly, Keanu holding the umbrella close over both their heads. The boy's steps were uneven, heavy. He stumbled once. Keanu steadied him without a word. Inside the house. The sudden warmth hit like a blanket. Keanu guided him to the bathroom, pulling clean towels from the cabinet. He handed Diego a dry sweater and sweatpants loose. But better than the drenched clothes clinging to his small frame. When Diego emerged, wrapped in the oversized sweater, Keanu had already placed a bowl of soup on the table, steam curling upward. In lazy spirals, they sat in silence for a few minutes. Diego ate slowly, as if unsure if he was allowed to. Keanu didn't push. He simply watched, his thoughts racing beneath the calm exterior. Why was the boy here? How did he find him? What had driven him into the storm alone? The bowl was empty. Diego set it down gently. His hands were still trembling, but there was a steadiness in his voice when he finally spoke. "I've been looking for you since morning." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "How did you know where to find me?" The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Worn and damp, he laid it on the table with care. It was a hand-drawn map, childlike but detailed. Streets marked with shaky lines, red circles around landmarks, and scrawled in large letters across the top. "Find Keanu Reeves. He helps people." Keanu stared at the paper, stunned. "Who gave this to you?" asked. Diego's voice barely rose above a whisper. "The kids at my group home, and a lady at a store downtown," they said. "If anyone could help, it would be you." A pause. "They said you're kind." Keanu's throat tightened. So much had been said about him over the years, actor, icon, loner, legend, but never had words struck so deeply as the quiet conviction in that. Child's voice kind. He looked at the boy, soaked, cold, tired, brave. What? Wait, had this child carried to get here? Outside, the rain still fell. Inside, the storm had only just begun. Keanu leaned back slowly, the air thick with unspoken questions. And then Diego said something that made the room fall still. "I need your help," he whispered. "They took my sister." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light across the living room walls. Rain still whispered against the windows, but inside, the air was warm thick with silence and something heavier beneath it. Keanu sat across from the boy, who had arrived like a ghost from the storm. Diego, wrapped in an oversized sweater, his damp hair now curling slightly at the edges, the boy looked younger than his journey suggested. But his eyes, dark alert, weary, told a different story. He hadn't flinched from the heat of the fire. He hadn't been distracted by the soft couch or the food on the table. Instead, he had sat with a quiet stillness, like someone holding something inside that might break if spoken too loudly. Keanu waited, not pressing but present. Then Diego spoke. Her name is Rosa. The name left his lips like a breath he'd been holding for days. She's my little sister. 5 years old. She's all I got. Keanu nodded gently. Where is she now? Diego looked down. His fingers curled tightly into the sleeves of the sweater. Gone. They took her away. We didn't mean kidnapped. The way he said it, they carried a different weight, institutional, sanctioned, cruel in its own legal correctness. Foster care split us, he said, voice flat now. They said she needed a different home, one with more support. They said I was too old to stay with her. We swallowed. They said she'd be okay. But she's not. Keanu's jaw tensed, but he kept his voice soft. How do you know? Because I know her, Diego replied immediately. Better than anyone. She doesn't talk much around strangers. She gets scared at night. She has this little rabbit. Toy Missy. If she doesn't have Missy, she doesn't sleep. And when there's thunder, she hides under the bed. Always has. He looked up at Keanu, eyes burning now. And when she hides, I'm the only one who can get her out. Keanu listened, unmoving. Every word carved a clearer picture in his mind. Not just of Rosa, but of Diego too. A child playing the role of protector. Not because anyone had asked him to, but because no one else would. They told me she needed a fresh start, Diego went on. What? But that meant leaving me behind. She doesn't need a fresh start. Oh, she needs to not be scared. She needs me. Keanu leaned forward. So you left? To find help? I waited for weeks, Diego whispered. I kept asking to talk to her, to see her. The staff kept saying they were working on it. But it felt like they wanted me to forget. He pulled something from his pocket, a photograph. Crumpled, edges worn. He laid it carefully on the table. In it, 2 children sat on a park bench. And a younger girl with a small stuffed rabbit in her lap. Her smile was timid, its eyes shy but fixed on her brother like he was the only safe thing in the world. Keanu picked up the photo gently. I heard people talking, Diego said. Someone mentioned your name, said you help people, said you show up when it matters. Keanu blinked. Who? A woman at a grocery store? I think she used to be a caseworker. She told me if anyone can help you, maybe it's him. I didn't even know where to start. The other kids in my home helped me draw that map. They said maybe if enough people believed you could help, you would. His voice cracked. So I walked. Keanu looked at him stunned. How long? Since early morning, Diego said. Some people gave me snacks. Others yelled. One man threatened to call the police. I just kept going. I thought, ... I thought maybe I was wrong, but then I found the house. And then the rain started. He swallowed hard. I almost left. I was scared you'd tell me to go away, but I didn't know where else to go. Keanu was silent. His heart thundered not from shock, but from a deep, rising urgency. This boy, who had crossed half the city, on foot, soaked and terrified, hadn't come for money or fame or attention. He had come for his sister, and he had come because someone, somewhere believed Keanu was the kind of man who might help. Keanu set the photo down, looked into Diego's eyes. You're not wrong, he said quietly. You did the right thing, and you're not going to do this alone. Diego blinked quickly, as if trying not to cry. He nodded. Keanu stood slowly and walked to a nearby shelf, pulling down a thick leather folder. Inside were papers, notes, contacts. Years of quiet charity work he rarely spoke about. Families he'd helped. Shelters he'd visited. Lawyers he trusted. Social workers who still returned his calls. The folder had collected dust. Not anymore. He sat back down, opened it, and turned toward Diego. Tell me everything, he said. Every name, every place, every piece of the story. And for the first time that night, the boy didn't tremble. He leaned forward and began to speak not like a lost child, but like someone who had just been heard for the first time and far. Too long outside, the rain slowed. Inside, something else had begun to move, a promise taking root, silent and strong. The fight for Rosa had begun. The map Diego had drawn wasn't much, just a shaky scrawl of streets and arrows with a red X over a place labeled Rosa. But it was enough to start with. Keanu studied it under a reading lamp, while Diego sat beside him, curled under a thick throw blanket, the crumpled photo of Rosa still clutched in his hand. Neither spoke much. The silence was no longer empty, it was deliberate. It was focused. Keanu's single quotes on the table. A name lit up. Hollis, a social worker he hadn't called in over a year. But tonight, the past was reaching back. With purpose, he picked up Hollis. "I need a favor. It's about a child in the system." Hollis replied instantly, "I'm listening." Keanu laid it all out: Diego's arrival, the separation, the uncertainty. Hollis didn't interrupt. When Keanu finished, there was a long pause. "You're describing at least 3 violations of standard policy," Hollis said. "Siblings aren't supposed to be split unless there's a medical or legal necessity. Who authorized this?" "We don't know yet," Keanu said. "But we're going to find out." Hollis sighed. "I'll send over what I can. I've still got contacts at family services. But if Rosa's been moved to a closed address, it means there's red tape, possibly litigation, or someone's hiding something." Keanu's voice dropped. "Then I'll rip the tape." He hung up. The room felt smaller suddenly. More urgent. He looked over at Diego, who had drifted into a light, restless sleep on the couch. His hand still gripped the photograph. Keanu stood and turned off the lamp. But he didn't sleep. Morning light spilled through the kitchen windows. Pale and cold, Keanu sat at the counter, laptop open, files scattered, his coffee untouched. A long list of names, placement records, and contact logs glowed on the screen, and then finally a lead. Placement site, Ivington Care Facility, Unit 4B. He stared at it. Ivington was supposed to be temporary housing for high-risk children. Why would Rosa be placed there? He called Hollis. "Ivington." Hollis echoed, confused. "That place is overflow. It's not meant for long-term care. She's 5. What the hell is she doing there?" Keanu felt something heavy settle in his chest. He went to wake Diego. The car ride was quiet. Diego stared out the window, fists clenched in his lap. Keanu kept one eye on the road and one on the boy. He could feel the storm gathering again, not in the sky, but in the heart of this search. Something didn't fit. Ivington sat on the edge of the city, tucked behind high gates and sterile landscaping. It didn't look like a place for children. It looked like a storage unit for problems people didn't want to face. At the front desk, Keanu gave his name and was met with instant recognition and resistance. "We don't allow unscheduled visits," the woman said flatly. "She's 5 years old," Keanu said, calm but cold. "You have her. I'm here on behalf of her brother." Woman hesitated. "I can call someone to escort you," she offered. "You'll do better than that," Keanu replied, stepping closer. "You'll bring her here." The tension in his voice didn't come from anger. It came from certainty. The kind that made people second-guess policies they didn't even understand. 10 minutes passed. 20 then the woman returned. "She's not here," she said. "She was transferred this morning." Keanu's face didn't move, but Diego stood up from the bench. "What do you mean, transferred?" she repeated. "They didn't tell us where." Keanu's voice dropped to something like thunder. "You moved a 5-year-old girl without logging the destination?" The woman looked shaken. "I only know what I'm told then. Tell someone above you to come down and explain." But no one came in the car. Diego was silent again. "Why do they keep hiding her?" he asked quietly. "Do they think I'll make things worse?" Keanu gripped the steering wheel tighter. "No, they don't think you matter at all, and that's the problem." Diego turned to him. "Do you think I matter?" Keanu met his eyes. "You walked through a city for your sister. You sat in the rain. You didn't give up. You mattered more than most grown men I know." Something in Diego's face cracked then. It's not a sob, but a release. Like someone finally stopped holding their breath. That night, Keanu made more calls. One to a private investigator he trusted. Another to a friend in media who owed him a quiet favor. Within hours, someone found a name. Rosa had been placed in a private facility under the supervision of a woman named Claire Monteza, social worker flagged once for ethics violations. And then came the worst part. Rosa wasn't the only child under Monteza's watch. Nearly a dozen children had been placed in remote housing projects, just outside city limits, away from public oversight. It wasn't a placement, it was a pattern, and Rosa was caught in it. Keanu stared at the monitor in the dark, the ache he'd felt on his. They had a name now. Injustice. And injustice had a face, small, fragile. And brave named Rosa, he turned to Diego, who had fallen asleep again. Curled in the corner with his sister's photo beside him, Keanu whispered softly, more to himself than to the boy. They took the wrong child from the wrong brother. And tomorrow, they'd find out just how big of a mistake that was. The map Diego had drawn wasn't much, just a shaky scrawl of streets and arrows, with a red X over a place labeled Rosa. But it was enough to start with. Keanu studied it under a reading lamp, while Diego sat beside him, curled under a thick throw blanket, the crumpled photo of Rosa still clutched in his hand. Neither spoke much. The silence was no longer empty, it was deliberate. It was focused. Keanu's phone buzzed on the table. A name lit up. Hollis, a social worker he hadn't called in over a year. But tonight, the past was reaching back with purpose. He picked up. Hollis, I need a favor. If it's about a child in the system, Hollis replied instantly, I'm listening. Keanu laid it all out. Diego's arrival, the separation, the uncertainty. Hollis didn't interrupt. When Keanu finished, there was a long pause. You're describing at least 3 violations of standard policy, Hollis said. Siblings aren't supposed to be split unless there's a medical or legal necessity? Who authorized this? We don't know yet, Keanu said. But we're going to find out. Hollis sighed. Send over what I can. I've still got contacts at family services, but if Rosa's been moved to a closed address, it means there's red tape, possibly litigation. Or someone's hiding something. Keanu's voice dropped. Then I'll rip the tape. He hung up. The room felt smaller suddenly, more urgent. He looked over at Diego, who had drifted into a light, restless sleep on the couch. His hand still gripped the photograph. Keanu stood and turned off the lamp, but he didn't sleep. Morning light spilled through the kitchen windows. Pale and cold, Keanu sat at the counter, laptop open, files scattered, his coffee untouched. A long list of names, placement records, and contact logs glowed on the screen. And then Finalia-led placement site, Ivington Care Facility, Unit 4B. He stared at it. Ivington was supposed to be temporary housing for high-risk children. Why would Rosa be placed there? He called Hollis Ivington. Hollis echoed, confused. That place is overflow, not meant for long-term care. She's 5. What the hell is she doing there? Keanu felt something heavy settle in his chest. He went to wake Diego. The car ride was quiet. Diego stared out the window, fists clenched in his lap.
Ow.
Keanu kept one eye on the road and one on the boy. He could feel the storm gathering again, not in the sky, but in the heart of this search. Something didn't fit. Ivington sat on the edge of the city, tucked behind high gates and sterile landscaping. It didn't look like a place for children. It looked like a storage unit for problems people didn't want to face. At the front desk, Keanu gave his name and was met with instant recognition and resistance. We don't allow unscheduled visits, a woman said flatly. She's 5 years old, Keanu said, calm but cold. You have her. I'm here on behalf of her brother. Woman hesitated. I can call someone to escort you, she offered. You'll do better than that, Keanu replied, stepping closer. You'll bring her here. The tension in his voice didn't come from anger. It came from certainty. The kind that made people second-guess policies they didn't even understand. 10 minutes passed. 20, then the woman returned. She's not here, she said. She was transferred this morning. Keanu's face didn't move, but Diego stood up from the bench. What do you mean, transferred? She repeated. They didn't tell us where. Keanu's voice dropped to something like thunder. You moved a 5-year-old girl without logging the destination? The woman looked shaken. I only know what I'm told, then tell someone above you to come down and explain. But no one came. In the car, Diego was silent again. Why do they keep hiding her? He asked quietly. They think I'll make things worse? Keanu gripped the steering wheel tighter. No, they don't think you matter at all, and that's the problem. Diego turned to him. Do you think I matter? Keanu met his eyes. You walked through a city for your sister. You sat in the rain. You didn't give up. You matter more than most grown men I know. Something in Diego's face cracked then, not a sob but a release. Like someone finally stopped holding their breath. That night, Keanu made more calls. One to a private investigator he trusted, another to a friend in media who owed him a quiet favor. Within hours, someone found a name. Rosa had been placed in a private facility under the supervision of a woman named Claire Montez, a social worker flagged once for ethics violations, and then came the worst part. Rosa wasn't the only child under Montez's watch. Nearly a dozen children had been placed in remote housing projects just outside city limits. Away from public oversight, it wasn't a placement, it was a pattern, and Rosa was caught in it. Keanu stared at the monitor in the dark, the ache he'd felt on his. The birthday had a name now, Injustice, and Injustice had a face, small, fragile, and brave, named Rosa. He turned to Diego, who had fallen asleep again. Curled in the corner with his sister's photo beside him, Keanu whispered softly, more to himself than to the boy. They took the wrong child from the wrong brother. And tomorrow, they'd find out just how big of a mistake that was. Keanu had seen enough scripts in his life to know how stories were supposed to end. Rescues were swift, reunions joyful, and justice clean. But this wasn't a movie. This was the system, and the system didn't like being challenged. 3 days after Rosa came home with Diego, the first legal notice arrived delivered to Keanu's gate in a manila envelope without a name. Temporary protective custody violation. I read. Failure to report an unapproved placement. Keanu read it twice, then calmly placed it on the counter and brewed a cup of tea. He wasn't rattled. He was ready. Hollis called an hour later. They're testing you, she said. Montez still has friends? Someone's trying to paint this as interference? What do they want? Keanu asked. They want you quiet, want the headlines buried. They want to scare you. Keanu looked over at the living room where Diego was helping Rosa braid her doll's yarn hair. He took a slow breath. Then let's make some noise. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, an emergency session to determine whether Rosa should remain in unauthorized placement or be returned to the care facility pending review. But something had changed since the moment. Rosa took Diego's hand. Keanu wasn't just helping them anymore. He was standing with them. He made 2 phone calls. The first, to his attorney Nadine Langford, quiet powerhouse known for dismantling bureaucratic nightmares one motion at a time. The second, to the press. He didn't give them names. Didn't break privacy laws. But he gave them truth. That a young boy had walked through the rain to find the one man he believed would listen. And that what they uncovered was a network of overlooked children, processed through loopholes and silence. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps were lined with reporters. Keanu arrived without a suit. No entourage, no sunglasses, just a gray sweater, jeans, and a hand in Diego's small one. Rosa clutched Missy and held her brother's other hand. The crowd didn't shout. They watched, curious, uncertain. Something about the moment was too raw to sensationalize inside. Montez sat with her attorney's lick, polished, impatient. She didn't look at the children, only at the judge. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a tired voice, opened. With little fanfare, Mr. Reeves, she said, you're not a guardian. You're not a foster parent. Explain why you're involved. Keanu stood. His voice was steady, measured, but beneath it pulsed something deep indignation, wrapped in grace. I didn't come here as an actor, he said. I came here because A boy showed up at my home on a stormy night and asked me to help his sister. He paused, looked directly at the judge. He believed adults would do what they're supposed to do. He believed someone would care. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the drawing Diego's original map. He found me with this. No GPS, no car, just hope. The courtroom was silent. When I brought him home, I thought I was just helping 2 kids. But it's bigger than that. This system is failing children by pretending to protect them. He turned to Montez, splitting siblings, hiding transfers, isolating young kids under the excuse of oversight. This isn't protection. It's paperwork dressed up as policy. The judge leaned back. Are you accusing this agency of negligence? Keanu met her eyes. I'm saying they stopped seeing people. They started managing files instead of families. A long pause followed. Then the judge looked down at her desk. Mr. Reeves, you're not the children's legal guardian, but you are now on record as an advocate. Gladly, he said. The judge turned to Montez's attorney. Do you have documentation justifying the separation of siblings? The attorney flipped through his files, hesitated. There were behavioral concerns, though the file was incomplete. Because, the judge asked. Montez's team sealed the review. He muttered. A murmur rippled through the room. Motion to unseal. The judge said flatly, I want the full picture.
Outside.
The media coverage exploded. Headlines spun. Keanu Reeves challenges foster care ruling in emotional courtroom speech. Actor stands up for separated siblings. Judge reopens case files. Child's drawing leads to uncovering of hidden placement network. But inside the house, Keanu didn't care about the noise. He cared about what came next. That night, Diego couldn't sleep. He stood at the doorway of the guest room where Rosa lay curled under blankets. Keanu joined him. Is she staying? Diego asked. Keanu knelt beside him. We're not done yet, but we're winning. What if they take her again? Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we fight harder. Together. A silence passed. Then Keanu added, You've already done more than most adults ever do. You've protected her with everything you have, Diego nodded. You're not a kid who needs saving, Keanu said. You're the reason she's still safe. The boy finally smiled. You think they'll believe me now? He asked. Keanu replied, They'll have to. But across the city, Claire Montez was shredding documents. She'd seen the coverage, read the quotes, heard the rumors of a full audit coming, and she knew this wasn't over. Not for her, not for any of them. The hearing room was silent, not the silence of peace, the silence of judgment. Rosa sat beside Diego at the long wooden bench, legs swinging gently above the floor. She clutched her stuffed rabbit Missy with one arm and held Keanu's hand with the other. She didn't say a word. But she didn't look afraid either, not with her brother beside her, not with him behind her. Keanu stood at the front of the courtroom, his shoulders relaxed, his voice calm. It's the same steadiness that once quieted entire movie sets now settled over the room like fog. I didn't come here to play a hero. He told the judge, and I didn't ask for any spotlight. I just listened. And when I listened to Diego really listened, I realized he wasn't just fighting for his sister. He was fighting to remind us all what family is supposed to mean. Looked back at the children, then forward again. When a system forgets the heart behind the paperwork, it becomes dangerous. Not because of malice, but because of neglect. Neglect left unchecked becomes cruelty. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowed. And you believe these children should remain under your care? Keanu nodded once. I believe they should. Be protected until their mother is fully cleared, until their voices are heard. And if you're asking if I'm willing to stand with them, then yes, as long as they need me. The room held its breath, and then she nodded. Motion granted. Temporary guardianship to Mr. Reeves, with monthly wellness checks. A formal reunification process with the mother to begin immediately. Stunned silence followed. Then did. You hear that? Diego whispered, eyes wide. Rosa leaned against him, her grip on Missy loosening just a little. Later that evening, Keanu stood in the hallway outside the children's room. Inside, Diego was teaching Rosa how to press the light up. Stars on the ceiling remote. They giggled when one turned blue and made her squeal. Their laughter was a sound Keanu didn't realize he'd come to need. He stepped away. Into the kitchen, where his lawyer Nadine Langford waited with a folder. "You've made a lot of people nervous," she said. "Quiet men with loud actions tend to do that." He smiled faintly. "Good." Nadine opened the folder. "You've got offers pouring in. Books, interviews, donation campaigns. Everyone wants your story." Keanu shook his head. "This wasn't a performance." "Then what do you want, Keanu?" He looked toward the living room, toward the photo of Diego and Rosa that now sat framed on the mantel. "I want the next kid who's forgotten to believe someone is coming." 1 week later, he made an appearance. Not on a red carpet, not at a premiere, at a town hall meeting for foster care reform. He stood before city officials and state workers with Diego and Rosa seated quietly in the front row. He didn't speak long, just enough. "I'm not here to accuse," he said. "I'm here to invite, to change, to remind everyone in this room that behind every file is a child. Every child matters." A slow, genuine applause followed, not for the celebrity, for the man. The real birthday came a week later. Keanu didn't tell anyone, didn't plan anything. But that morning he walked into the kitchen to find a shoebox on the table, wrapped in brown paper and messy tape, crayon drawing taped to the top read, "To Mr. K, from the Storm Team." Inside were 3 things. A drawing 3 stick figures standing under a crooked rainbow. One with a long beard, 2 smaller ones, holding hands. A handwritten adoption contract, scribbled in pencil, signed by Diego and Rosa. Terms: 1 hug per day, extra pancakes on weekends, and no leaving during bad dreams. And at the bottomer, silver keychain with 1 word etched into it, "Home Keanu." Didn't cry, but something inside him shifted. Like an old wound finally closing. Like stillness turning into belonging. He looked up. Diego and Rosa stood in the doorway, sleepy-eyed and grinning. "Happy birthday," Diego said. "We made you breakfast," Rosa added. Keanu walked over, dropped to his knees, and for the first time in years he didn't feel alone, not even a little. Epilogue: 18 months, Laterra Foundation was launched. Storm Team Trust, privately funded, quietly run. Its mission was simple: give voice to children failed by the system. Its founder rarely spoke publicly, but stories spread of him visiting shelters unannounced, dash of him sitting cross-legged on floors, listening to children who hadn't been listened to in years, of him showing up when no one else did. And sometimes, in interviews, someone would ask, why him? Why did a movie star get involved? And those who knew would answer, because one little boy believed he would. Final image: Keanu Reeves sits on a bench in a quiet park, Rosa napping against his shoulder, Diego tossing a football nearby. No cameras, no noise, just a soft breeze, the sound of leaves, the weight of a child's head on his chest, and a quiet smile on his face. Because in choosing solitude, he found the family he never expected, and gave them the home no one else would.